I mean, I think it ended up to be a nice.
But I have a good
Okay.
But it's a cluster of stores,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one of them. The only reason you know is this Connecticut one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a camp,
Yeah.
and there's a card swipe.
It's the equivalent, yeah, it is. She's kind of.
I don't know her. Yeah. 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 Yes.
She wraps her legs.
Yeah, Glorious. Not that Glorious. One
That other
Glorious,
one,
right.
M&M or something.
Oh, it's in
Yeah,
there?
No, I guess there's one down the street from
Right.
there
This
that had
one,
problems with that
the
according
golf
to my
station.
brother.
Really don't remember. I want to say.
Yeah.
I tell you, I wrote down, was it 310? 318 in Indianapolis. And across the street is the golf station, and there's a donut place. Not far.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, you get to open up all these.
I was going to immediately defer to him, unless people want to make any opening statements.
Why don't you make some opening
Okay,
statements,
yeah.
kind of feel out where people are at?
Okay, you recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, while Mr. Habansky is making some copies for us, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:08. The purpose for this, as you know, we've had a lot of discussion, at least on the planning side, for trying to finally do something. We've done the extensions of the medical marijuana prohibition, or temporary moratorium, to be more specific. And we've gone through this, I think, 3 years in a row where we've done the extensions on it, and we really do need to just take the time to actually come up with something more permanent that we can leave behind. That's been one of the goals that I wanted to see us actually tackle. As you know, we're sort of at the tail end of our, at least of my term, and all of the land use boards are going to have at least 3 out of 5 members come off due to term limits. So it makes sense at this juncture to actually move forward with this. So just for purposes of introduction, I don't know, we haven't done one of these joint sessions in a while, and everybody, I keep saying joint session when we do this. It is a pun, but, you know, let's not make too much of it, you know, when we're talking about marijuana. But anyway, from my planning side, I just want to introduce, we have our Commissioner, Pat Petusky, and alternate Commissioner Harold Watson. I'm Chris Silhavy. I'm co-presiding with Commissioner Steffi Phillips. You want to introduce your members?
And from the zoning commissioner, we have Mr. Steve Roguskas, Mark Giuliano, and Linda Pepin.
Okay.
And Mr. Fuller will be arriving shortly.
And I'm sure the rest of my members will be floating in because we have our regular business meeting tonight. So I know Mr. Habansky did some work on a draft regulation, and that's what he's copying. So, you know, while we're waiting for him, I'm just going to give him the floor to begin the discussion. But, you know, just to make use of our time, does anybody else want to make any opening statement of what they hope to accomplish in this meeting, Commissioner?
The purpose of what we're coming together for today is to get some general framework about where we want to go with our regulations. And by the way, the moratorium was only for about a year, and it is scheduled to expire, I think it's February of 2018. The framework should comprise as your thoughts in terms of, are we leaning towards, yes, we would like to have regulation that allows or not allow methadone clinics? And then separately, are we leaning for or against allowing medical marijuana dispensaries? And there's actually 2 kinds. There's a dispensary and there's also the growers, I think. But we won't have a license for growers, so most of our focus will be on the dispensaries. If we decide that we do want to lean towards allowing either one of those, then part of this framework should be discussion about how we want to see it regulated, managed, which would be site location, regulations around the administering of the building, and any other thoughts that you might have. If in that framework of this discussion you would like more information or a field trip, this is a good time for us to talk about that so that we can ask for the information, get the resources that we need to support whatever research or information that we're doing. And the regulations that Mr. Habansky just put forward is a mock-up of some thoughts that he has put together based on the zoning commission's feedback to him when we had our last meeting.
With some additional notes. I've handed out an updated one that I was going to work off it tonight, but everybody has it now.
Okay. So that's where we are right now, and I think to begin with, and then it's probably the easiest, is to get, it's not a vote, but at least a straw feeling and opinion. And I want to do these separating medical marijuana and methadone, because they're really two different things, even though we're doing it at the same time, is does a collective board lean yes or no for either one of them, because that will determine whether or not we want to have further discussion. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Solhavy to move forward.
Okay. Well, I think,
Straw poll?
I don't understand. Well, let's open up again, we're starting this as a discussion point, so let's just go around the circle and just see what people want to add, and if you want to address that, by all means, go ahead. Mr. Watson, you want to go first? No? You can always pass. We're pretty informal around here.
I'm listening.
You're listening. Okay. Ms. Patesky?
We went just before this meeting to the place in Milford, and I do have a picture of it. It's pretty innocuous. I mean, it's right next to a lawyer's office, and across is a massage therapist, and if anybody wants to see a picture of it, I did take a picture. It's called the Connecticut Wellness Center, so if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know it was there. And it's in a commercial area, restaurants across the street, stuff like that. So I would imagine that the people who would be going to this, since it is medical marijuana, are probably going, and I hate generalities, but they're probably going to be older, disabled. They're going to have a prescription. So this is not a hangout for buying, drugs or something like that. You're not going to be allowed in. They have a swipe card, so you can't even go in the place, A, without being on camera, and B, you can't just walk in the door. It looked very secure and very well maintained. The location has plenty of parking. If that's what Stratford would have, I really don't have a problem with, as long as it's medical marijuana.
Okay.
Did you happen to go in, Pat, or they didn't allow you in? Or?
They wouldn't allow me in.
Okay.
Because I don't have
Yeah,
a prescription. But I looked inside, and all it was, it looked a little bit like a doctor's office with, you know how they have the glass enclosed office?
Yeah.
And just a couple of chairs were there, and then you go into another door, and what they do back there, I don't know. I don't know whether they dispense right from that front window office or you go inside. So that part, because it was so secure, I could not get in.
Mrs. Pepin, you want to?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. I'm in the medical profession, and so I really do think that this is the an avenue that we would like to go to. My only problem with it is that I think it needs to be restricted and controlled very well. I was going to try and find out if I could get some information on the one in Milford. The one in Milford, the wellness one, I think came to planning some years ago to us, but we had no regulations, so we let it go. My only other issue is that we asked the lawyers for the town, would the state back us up if something went a little haywire? And he said no. that if something went terribly wrong at the facility for whatever reason. So that's my other issue. I mean, I get that, and that was a couple of years ago when we first kind of got into this. So I would like to re-ask the lawyers what they think about this. When I read the draft, I do think that we need to be really restricted. I know that this new one says a site plan submitted, which I think is a great idea. This other one where it says if you want to be more restrictive, eliminate the use in a CA and MA. I mean, I think that's a good idea. Unfortunately, I just think that right now we have to be really restrictive in this field. I think that's all the comments I had right now.
Okay, Mr. Giuliano?
But I really do think that we need to have some regulations, in place.
Mr. Giuliano?
I have paperwork from 2014 that we've been going around with this, and I do believe we have plenty of restrictions. We should basically already know what we want. It's just putting a lasso around it and getting it all together. I have constituents in my neighborhood that are in their 70s that would love to go there because they are going to Bethel and New Milford. Now they can go to Milford, but they'd rather spend their tax dollars that come back to have it stay here in Stratford. There's also a pill they make. I have a buddy of mine that has throat cancer, and he's on the pill because he's had enough of the opioids or whatever else they've been giving him, and he's better off probably with taking the pill. So I think we have plenty of restrictions. I just like to see us get it together. And to Mrs. Pepin, Commissioner Pepin there, one of the notes was restricted, eliminate in retail commercial. Yes, maybe, but not in light industrial. I'm sure that would be fine there. I mean, as long as we have all these restrictions, we're not going to be near a school, and it just goes on and on. And I think we need to move forward. And if we have, can we make the tax money or the dollars that come there not go into the general fund? Let's put it into good use. Would be a stipulation.
And I also think that wellness facility is probably a good way to start to find it. Could we find out from their planning and zoning commission, like how it's working? Is it working okay? What are the snags? Or do you call the police department? Who do you call that?
Yeah, you could call the zoning office. I've actually spoken to them, and they had, from my interaction with the planning director as well as the zoning enforcement officer over there, they've had no issues.
Yeah.
And as you can see, just as Commissioner Patuski said, you go there, you have no idea. I mean, if you stick this use in a medical office park, you would have no idea that they're there.
Yeah.
And given the scrutiny that a lot of these businesses are under, they don't want to have a big neon pot leaf flashing in front of their building.
Well, that wellness, you would never know if you saw wellness on the front.
They want to do their best to be a credible business that people doubt that I think that they are. So
It's not here.
But
I've heard no issues with Milford as well as Brantford.
wasn't there at one time when, maybe about a year or so ago, that we were, in one of our paperwork, there was some kind of tour that we were able to go on or something? We were going to meet with the growers or these people in Milford?
So the dispensary that runs in Brantford, they were expressing strong interest in coming to Stratford. And they wanted to come to they offered to give anyone that wanted a tour of their site, a tour of their facility, and just give a brief overview. Yeah, look at that. A brief overview of how their operation runs and what their interactions were like getting approved, what the state requirements are, because there's very, very little that isn't already under the state permit.
Right.
like security issues. I mean, they have to have a minimum, I think it's a minimum of a security system that equates to approximately, I think, $1 million security system. So there are minimum requirements that the state permit actually has that go far beyond.
Well, maybe the state has more more requirements now than they did 2 years ago, because 2 years ago.
Ms. Peppin, I just want to give Mr. Roguskis a chance as we get into.
Well, actually, what you just brought up there, Ms. Pepin, was exactly where I was going to go. We've got a neighbor that has one of these facilities, and I wondered if there had been any issues, and there haven't been. I don't imagine there really have been anywhere in Connecticut, because like you said, they've got strong restrictions and regulations, and it's a prescription drug being dispensed by professionals, and I don't see any reason not to bring the facility here and let Stratford benefit from people coming here. Now, a separate thing, and I don't know, I thought we were actually, I thought we were starting with the methadone clinic, but it seems like everybody went right to. So would you rather I hold off on what I have to say about methadone clinic?
Yeah, why don't we do marijuana and we'll come back to methadone?
Can I,
think there's
now that everybody is...
two different opinions. I can tell you some of my experience, and then can lead into methadone. The marijuana dispensaries have an enormous amount of security attached to them, and what was interesting is they have more security they're located in a retail environment than pharmacies that have stronger, more addictive drugs, which have little or none. And we tend, I think, as a society, to react, to the term marijuana, but not recognizing that pharmacies that we don't seem to have a problem with have oxycodone and other more controlled drugs on site. I mean, you can't even get Sinutab anymore unless you go to the pharmacy behind. So I want to keep it in perspective that we don't stigmatize an industry because of societal ideas or the people who access these drugs because of medical reasons. We don't stigmatize people who use oxycodone or some of the other drugs no more than we should stigmatize people who use medical marijuana. I spent 20 minutes watching this site, just hanging outside to see who came there. And honestly, you couldn't tell if these people were buying groceries or going to a dispensary. Most of them were seniors. There were several people clearly with eyesight problems. But there was nothing about them in terms of their character that you could make a stereotypical decision about, nor were there people hanging around in the parking lots. They seemed to all come in, and I don't know, but the way they came, it seemed like they had appointments because nobody was bunched up in the parking lot. So, and they were let in. They had their little slider card, and they came in, and 10 minutes later, they walked out. And when you look through the door, all I saw was a bench, what do you call it, like a counter. I saw the counter and a woman sitting behind the counter. That's it. So whatever happens after that, because the glass is kind of shaded, I don't know. So I have a much more open acceptance and comfort level with the location of a dispensary and would follow the same practice that I would a pharmacy. If I'm willing to put a pharmacy there, then I'm okay with putting a dispensary there. That's the short of it. Putting it in the corner, in the back industrial area, I think is the wrong thing to do and sends the wrong message, and probably would invite more problems than if it was sitting in Paradise Green and nobody knew what it was. So that's one thought. Moving into a different direction, the methadone clinic, I probably have a different opinion. We have one in town. There are some issues. I think we might need to tighten regulations. I don't know if we need to rush for another methadone clinic. I'd like more information on that as well. So I'm in the camp that many of you are. I think having a road trip or have some way of looking at it ourselves would be a way to sort of ease the public's comfort level with this. That's my thought.
One final question, and I actually agree with most everything that was said here, but does
the way this is being written right now, would this allow a medical marijuana facility in a medical building?
Well,
Or have we written it in such a
order
way?
to-
That depends on some details.
get into that, I think that's actually a good segue to let Mr. Bansky give us his initial opening remarks, and he'll probably end up touching on that before we get too far into the weeds. Why don't you give us a big overview, and then we can actually get into the actual details. And just so that all members of both commissions are aware, I don't expect us to resolve this tonight. We have an hour, There's more parts of this. We're going to have to meet a couple times, and I am very interested in actually doing the field trip and see how this works and get a full understanding of what we're doing so that we can, especially the fact that we're talking about our neighboring town has gone through this. It's not that we have to travel 400 miles away to see how this works. We can just go across the bridge and see what's going on there. So, Mr. Bansky, why don't you just give us your overview and what you'd like to just share with the members assembled here tonight?
Sure. So, should these regulations end up being adopted at some point, the approval process is actually going to be quite similar to any new building, any new large business that would be coming in. It's a special case approval. It's a site plan review. Some of the unique characteristics of it actually would be distances to particular uses that might be impacted, schools, playgrounds, things like that. And you put that burden on the applicant. They come in with a site plan that shows their distance to all these different uses that might be of interest to the commissioners. On page 2, some of the things that we've talked about, and this is to me is really the crux of the issue. Where do you want to allow these different uses? Because we're talking about. There should be extras. I got them.
I put them out.
And this is the crux of it, and this is what Commissioner Fuller and I have actually spent a lot of time talking about. Is there are two approaches. Do we want to allow the market? Do we want to be flexible and allow the market to determine itself? Then we allowed the zones that were originally proposed in 2014, which are LBB, the CA, CF, CNC, MA, and MB. Those are basically our commercial districts and our light industrial zones. If we want to be more restrictive, and this is to address some of the things that Commissioner Pepin was talking about, being maybe more restrictive initially, and we always have the flexibility to add more zones as it matures and the town starts to gain more confidence in some of our businesses that are here. We can always add those. But just to say that, okay, let's just put them all in a light industrial district would be the wrong approach, I think, for Stratford. That's why I brought up the zoning map here. We have the commercial districts are red. The light industrial districts are purple and dark purple. So just to say that we're going to put them all in an industrial district, you would actually be giving them quite a bit of flexibility. Whereas most suburban towns, it's actually the opposite. You have more commercial, less industrial. So I think you would actually be more restrictive by saying a producer or a growery can only be allowed in a heavy industrial, an MB, which is the dark purple, or light industrial, because these are typically in large warehouses and they're fenced and no one even has access to these.
Can I just ask her?
Sure.
Didn't they say they were restricting the growers, though, in the state, or did they open that up a little more? I thought they
There
were.
are grower permits. I mean, they unroll permits to grow as well as to dispense.
When I read this 6 months ago, they were severely restricting the growing permits.
Yeah, okay.
Dispensary
But
permits.
like you said, we should have some kind of a.
And we should cover both.
Mr.
Not
Fuller,
that
you
they
had
would
something you
give
want to
it
add?
to us.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. In terms for licensing for producing or for dispensing, and there's a different criteria for each one, it's all regulated by the State Department of Consumer Protection. They're the license granting authority. So whatever, it's up to them ultimately to say, so say we have someone say we have a regulation that allows for a production facility, whatever manifestation it takes. They could apply to the Stratford Zoning Commission and say, hey, we intend to use this for municipal marijuana or cannabis production. That's not to say they're ever going to get the license from the DCP. That's another consideration I was having on my long ride home in Fairfield County traffic is that's another consideration we might want to consider is they have, I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Does the licensing come first or does the site plan come first and the proposals come first? Because then are we overriding state regulation, which would then nullify that
Local
particular
approval comes
stipulation?
first. Local approval comes first.
Okay.
At least
So-
that's the way it was 2 years ago when I last sat on a medical marijuana facility. They had to get their local approval first. They were approved, and then they went to the state, and then they weren't chosen to be one of the permittees.
So you could have approval, but it never be realized because of state oversight.
Because the state is also trying to control how many permits they're issuing
Yeah,
every
because I
year.
thought I read that they were like stopping all growing places, that there weren't any more in the state of Connecticut. They weren't issuing anymore. Okay. But like you said, we should have some regulation on that. Just-
Sure. So then going back to what I was saying before is that, so that's just cornering everything into an industrial district might not be the right approach. Some of the ideas that we'd had in order to make it a bit more restrictive would be to allow it in an LBCF, and I'll show you just over here. There are very few, here's one CF zone, there's another little LB, here's an LB zone here. And this is LB zone here. You have a dark blue NB, let's see, NB and MB. What's MB again? Heavy industrial.
The red's up there, where are those?
Yeah, what's actually there?
Where are those actually?
Which one?
You know.
Like that one?
That one.
That's the OPD district, office parking.
Oh.
So, it's whatever direction that the commissions decide that they want. I happen to just believe that, I think that if you want to replicate what some of our commissioners have seen in Milford, you don't banish them to your industrial districts. You allow them maybe in your commercial zones where, they can't just look like some little pop-up shop that's going to be there tonight and gone tomorrow, and they're only open till midnight. If you allow them to be open and visible, there's a potential that they become more of an unobserved business that's just operating like everybody else.
Through the chairs. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is a cash business?
So what?
Cash
I
business.
could
Ash? Okay.
I could answer a little bit to that. Well, it's the reason why the regulation wasn't passed back in 2015. Under the Controlled Substance Act, federal law, there is no such thing as medical marijuana. All marijuana is not legally defined as having medical utility by wording of federal law, federal statute. Scientifically, it's proven otherwise, but legally, it's defined that way. So, as a result, the IRS, maybe certain drug enforcement agencies, this is why banks don't want to do business with a medical marijuana facility, whether it's Colorado or Connecticut, because of all the taxation liabilities that would happen for that. So they operate in strict cash and cash reserves or some other form of barter and trade. So that's is that something Stratford zoning could regulate? Is that something Stratford planning wants to get involved with? I don't
If I
know,
could
but
continue, now that we know it's a cash business, I would think that we would not want it, as you said, in any kind of light industrial, at least for dispensaries, because that's out of the way. It could lead to more issues, more crime around, someone carrying cash into the dispensary to purchase something and coming out. At least if it's in a commercial area, you have more foot traffic, you have more people around. It's to me less dangerous. So I would follow your suggestion actually and try and keep it in a commercial area but put restrictions around security, around signage, so that indeed, as you saw in Milford, you can't even tell it's there.
I do want to add, there's a couple other points to just bring forward. One is, when you install a dispensary, as Jay started to say, it's a huge investment by that owner, more than $1 million. That business is there to stay. They just don't pick up and fly off that night or, next month. So for a developer or a property owner management, that is a solid business with guaranteed income for a very long time. It's a stable business. And although our responsibility isn't to look at the tax base, we do affect it. And it is one of the businesses that would be part of a stable tax base for this community without adding to the usual things that we worry about, like traffic and crime, because of the fact that they have such secure centers of their own. They're not high traffic areas, so even in a small complex, and not anybody go nuts, but if we were to look at it next to the walk-in clinic that's next to the bakery, what's the name of that walk-in clinic? MedNow. If they were next to MedNow, there would be less traffic going to this dispensary than what you would see going into MedNow. And MedNow would have more drugs that are at risk than this dispensary. So it's the kind of business that Stratford should open their opportunities to, because it does help us. And we have a sizable population in Stratford, and I think Mark started to talk to that, where that community is now traveling at some distance to try to go and get this medication in the dispensaries, where they can't do it in their own community, and their tax dollars are going elsewhere. So it's something that I'd like to have included in that.
Matt?
Mr. Hibansky and then Mr. Watson will go back and forth. Okay.
I just wanted to add, because I was at the tail end of just my general overview, is that other than the minimum state requirement for security that anybody would be required to do, on the last page, there are some additional things like you can't have a drive-through facility, you can't be, the Winnebago pulled up into the parking lot down to Luke Field. It's got to be a physical shelter, and then regulating the hours. That way, you can at least have a bit more control on how the business operates as a general brick-and-mortar business would. And that's it.
Mr. Watson?
I just ask that we look at the users, because what we're talking here is medical marijuana. We're talking about people who have a medical need for this, which I'm reading through this and I'm saying, where is there such thing as accessibility and handicapped? We're dealing with an elderly population. We're dealing with a population that has disabilities. So when we look at that from that point of view, what we're offering essentially is an out for people who have used up every other kind of out in most cases. And I say this with my mother, who has hideous rheumatoid arthritis in Vermont, and I've often considered going up there and getting her the same thing. My experience of people using medical marijuana in Massachusetts those are people who, they're not the person you run from on a street at night. For the most part, they're walking with canes, or they're wheelchair bound, or they have mobility issues and all these kinds of things in order for them to get to that need to begin with. So if we're going to look to other facilities, maybe a population list, a list of population would make a lot of sense, because reading the regulations here, we talk so much about this as if it's a social ill, and it's not a social ill. We list a whole list of things where it shouldn't be near, instead of saying where it should be. It should be accessible. It should have ADA requirements. It should be in a well-lit area. There are all kinds of things that, if we're going to say where it shouldn't be and what we should fear it as, we should also include where we want it to be, so that it is actually an asset for our town.
I would also add, it may be worth it to reach out to our state representative, Laura Hoydick. I was with her this morning as we were discussing that we would have a discussion of this later today. And she mentioned that she did a quick lookup on her phone and to the database that she has access to. And don't quote me, but I think she said there was about 2,000 users that were registered that they, in this general facility that she knew about. And I think to get better numbers, it would be good to bring her in so she could get more detailed information.
I think that'd be very helpful to get some information from the state point of view, and I see Mr. Giuliano, one sec. And I just wanted to say that, especially understanding what I think is one thing that the commission, that this group has have to keep in mind is where the state is coming down on medicinal versus recreational. I think that's a bigger issue that we need to discuss. Mr. Giuliano.
Sure. I couldn't agree with Harold anymore. Well, here we are, can't be here, and we should be doing what he said. But my original point, what I wanted to start off at was, all right, we all have a comment issue, you know, we don't want it in a light industrial or whatever. How about a landlord? He might not even want it. So, I mean, you talk like one of our better places in town, that's what they're thinking, and they might not want it in the green, or they might not want it in the center, a landlord there. So we have that issue to look at.
Well, I think before dispensary, just like any business, before they come before us for a license, they actually go to the landlord and see if there's an interest. And if the landlord says, no, I don't want to rent to you, well, then they don't. So I don't think that determination is going to really come from us. No different than if somebody says, I have an ice cream shop, and the landlord says, nah, I don't really want an ice cream shop here. I think the marketplace on that end of it might, be cure that. But on the other hand of it, you might find a particular area that says, gee, I want a small business, because they don't take up, it's a small office, right, that doesn't have a lot of traffic, that might fit into my particular condominium mix, because I need a very low traffic type of stable business. So that gives them some options.
Do we still have anybody that wants to come here? I'm sorry there. We do?
Mr. Mansky?
I've been contacted by anywhere between 15 and 20 potential dispensary businesses. They have all told me that Stratford is a strategic location between Fairfield County and New Haven County, and they want to be here. They don't want to be in Fairfield. They don't want to be in Westport. They want to be in Stratford. This may be the sales pitch to us, to the town that they're giving us, but they all seem to be pretty consistent with that information, that Stratford is a strategic location for this type of use.
Mr. Fuller?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to what, market regulations, whether a landlord would take on this sort of business or not, which is just how capitalism regulates itself. In addition to that, I would strongly recommend, and it is in draft regulations, that it is a special case application, which also gives the zoning commission a lot of leeway on just looking at, does it make sense in harmony to its direct neighborhood, which gives the commission, one, a four-vote supermajority latitude, and two, to take in those special unique considerations, like a package store, like a smoke shop, like anything else of that nature. TOD is a special case. So I think that also puts in some additional safeguards should the commissions opt for adopting these regulations or something similar to it. I think that provides an extra layer of oversight. In addition to, and you might see some landlords don't want to take on a cash-only business. Some of them like it, less paperwork. Some of them think it's more risk-averse. We can't tell what landlord to take on what client. That's not the role of government. The other thing we should consider, too, and I agree with Chairman Shahavi's point on this, we really need to differentiate recreational use, which is illegal under both federal and state laws. And I think just the add verbiage that that it prohibits recreational use until a point when federal state laws liberalized, then the Stratford Zoning Commission and Planning Commissions could then revisit those issues in the future. But what we don't want to do is to have a backdoor recreational approval when we're really intending medical use, a civic good as opposed to a social ill.
I'd like to make, because I'm looking in the interest of time and being respectful, I'd like to make a suggestion, if everybody's interested, that we do a field trip. We make arrangements to maybe get a bus from, maybe the senior center will let us have a bus and we can get a driver. Mr. Hibansky, maybe we can work together with you to see what we can arrange and pick a administrative session, one of ours, and we can probably cover a couple places. We can run up to Milford, which is only about 15 minutes away, and while we're at it, we haven't discussed it tonight, and we can save it for another night. We can swing by maybe and take a look at the methadone clinic so that people know where it is. And again, it's a visual. And if we have an opportunity to actually talk to people at both those facilities, it might be helpful. Is that something anyone is interested in?
I think everybody would appreciate that. I don't see any objection. The one thing I would just note, having done this once before with a zoning issue, is you might just want to check with the town attorney's office because there's some doing things off-site. You have to record the session because even though it's going to be held someplace else, so we'll just have to figure out the logistics of that. But I don't think that's going to be a problem, to be honest with you.
We're going to drag Gail along in our tape recorder.
I'll be the bus driver.
You'll be the bus driver. But yeah, it has to be properly
mystery
noticed.
machine.
What I'll do is I'll reach out to the Connecticut Wellness Center. I can't guarantee that they're going to be open. They may not want anybody in there. So we'll reach out and see what they say, and if they are open to it, we'll make it happen.
Yes, that's another interesting point because there is HIPAA regulations where if there's any sort of patient disclosure, just someone showing up, getting a prescription, technically it's medical information.
We might have to do it when they're not open and it might have to be on an irregular day, or I don't know what their hours are, or if it's late in the evening, or if they're like not open on Sunday, we might have to do it something special to make it work. But you're right, Dave. That's actually a good point.
Generally open 7 to 10. They want to be able to have the same accessibility.
7 p.m. to 10 p.m. or
7 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Wow. Okay.
They want to have the same accessibility to distribute their products to people who need it, who work.
CVS
Just
doesn't
like
open until
Rite
10
Aid
p.m.
is open 24 hours a day.
Yeah, just like. So if we do that, let's plan on doing that, and Mr. Solhevi and I will coordinate with our respective boards to pick a date that works for us in the next month or so. We've got some time. And I'm willing to table the discussion on this topic unless anybody else has something more to add. And Mr. Solhevi? Mr.
I would just say that the more recently updated draft that I handed out tonight, take a look at it, and if you have any other comments, just send them to me, and what I'll do is I'll just start tabulating a anonymous comments list from everybody, so that we'll just kind of have a running history of what we're thinking as we really start to finalize the draft.
Before we wrap up, is there anyone else that we would like to bring in as a speaker to talk to us about this? I mean, I think we talked about somebody from state, either the representative or somebody from Consumer Protection, which I guess oversees this. Anyone else want to suggest, Mr. Teskey?
Is it possible to get the regulations from Milford?
Yeah, those are available online. They're on their town website. I can tell you, these are more comprehensive than what Milford has. Yeah, but we can certainly print them out.
Whatever date that we come up with, I'd like to invite our state reps to join us. Sure. They might add some information to it as well.
Also, I think a good courtesy would be to address somebody from one of the public safety departments of the police, fire, EMS, someone who works with people. And I'm not so much thinking from a safety standpoint, but from a medical standpoint, because a lot of them are trained as emergency professionals. Also, the health department, too, the Stratford's own health department, see if they have any comment on the subject. I think would be very useful too, because they're going to be probably doing some oversight of it. And also any professional, someone who works in either in dispensing or in production in some shape or form. Particularly one that's not one of those 15 to 20 that's looking into Stratford, but maybe someone with already established business, whether in Connecticut or elsewhere.
Okay, we could probably get that out of the health or wellness people as well. You invite them to come to us.
I know we didn't discuss methadone, but there is some connection with medical marijuana and methadone in terms of getting people off oxycodone and heroin. So that in terms of long term, it has been shown to be an effective way of keeping them off heavier drugs. And I just want to make the statement that Stratford is, we're a banner town for oxycodone deaths and heroin deaths. So this is not something that we should wait another year on, because there are people with needs in that area also, not just elderly, not just people with long-term disabilities, but people who essentially are working at recovery. This is another avenue for them in that area where we could actually be socially responsible to those people.
I think this gives us an opportunity to talk to the people at the methadone clinic that we have on Research Drive, kind of see what their results have been, you know, the pluses and the minuses. We're lucky enough to have something up and running so that we can get a first-hand view of it, so that's a good time.
He might be a good person to have at a meeting, the director of that clinic.
I have one question too. When is our moratorium done with? February, Jay?
February 2018.
Okay.
Okay, one last chance. Does anyone else want to add anything before we... Okay, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
I just want to thank our chairman for doing this. I think it's really valuable, and it's good to see this moving forward.
Thank you.
I second.
Okay, we'll take that from Mr. Watson as a motion to adjourn, second by Mrs. Pepin. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Have a good night, everyone. We're adjourned at 6:55. And for the planning members, just hang around. We'll start up in a bit.
This is the more recent one, right?